Hey guys, tonight we travel way, way back, past the pyramids, before the Greeks were philosophizing, even before sandals were trendy. You're in ancient Mesopotamia now, where the rivers hiss in the dark, the air smells like wet dirt and animal sweat, and someone is aggressively poking a lump of clay with a stick. You're standing in a cluttered corner of a temple storage room in the city of Uruk. It's crowded with sacks of grain, broken pottery, and one very cranky-looking scribe. He hasn't slept in 2 days, his clay stylus is chipped, and he's trying to remember who borrowed 3 goats and forgot to return them. You're not much help, you don't even speak Sumerian. But you are here to witness the birth of something wonderfully mundane, the receipt. Not the glossy, crumpled thing in your modern jeans pocket. We're talking about the very first record of transaction, scratched into clay, left to dry under the Mesopotamian sun, and destined to make some poor archaeologist's day thousands of years later. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and hey, if you're still awake, tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is right now. I love knowing where you all are in the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle a little closer to the scribe. Careful not to knock over a basket of fish bones. The man's name is, let's say, Lugal, which roughly translates to big man, but, judging by the bags under his eyes, he doesn't feel very big at the moment. Lugal is trying to solve a problem. Merchants and farmers keep coming into the temple saying things like, "Hey, I gave you 10 jars of oil last week," or "Where's the silver I lent the priest's nephew?" People are forgetful. People are liars. And both of those things are really bad for business. So Lugal has begun doing something revolutionary. Instead of relying on memory or verbal promises, he started pressing little pictographs into soft clay, each mark representing quantities of grain, animals, oil, or beer. Then, the clay tablets are left to dry, or sometimes even baked. Once hardened, they become something new, physical proof of a transaction, in other words, a receipt, and you know what? It works. People start trusting the system. Well, mostly. Some still try to argue. One old man claims the tablet lies. Lugal just waves the evidence in his face and says, "You signed it, my guy," though in Akkadian, and with more sighing. The earliest writing systems were not invented for poetry or philosophy. Sorry, Homer. They were created for math and debt. Some of the oldest known written records are essentially grocery lists and invoices. You can imagine the disappointment of scholars who were hoping for epic tales and instead found something like 2 shekels of silver paid for 5 measures of barley. Signed, Uarnamu. But it's amazing in its own sleepy way. A civilization born between 2 rivers, Tigris and Euphrates, becomes obsessed with keeping track of things. Crops. Animals. Laborers. Even beer rations, because yes, Mesopotamians loved their beer. Workers were literally paid in daily beer allowances, and you bet those rations were written down in clay. The styluses used were made from reeds, cheap, sharp, and perfect for scratching lines and wedges into the clay. Eventually, this technique evolves into what we now call cuneiform. And the symbols get complicated. You look at one tablet and see a pattern that looks like a comb attacking a bird. That means flower. Probably. Historians still argue whether some of the earliest pictographs represented sounds or just ideas. And poor Lugal. He just wants to go home. But before he does, he has to file the day's receipts into neat stacks, one for livestock, one for grain, one for fish, and slide them into niches along the temple wall. It's not glamorous, but it's the beginning of bureaucracy. You can almost feel your eyelids growing heavier just thinking about it. One curious detail. These receipts didn't always sit out in the open. Sometimes they were sealed in clay envelopes, yes, clay envelopes, with the summary written on the outside. That way, no one could tamper with the tablet without breaking the outer shell. You had to smash it open to check the original. Early fraud protection, Mesopotamian style. And here's something weirder: before writing developed fully, people used little clay tokens to represent goods, one for a sheep, one for a jar, one for a bushel. They'd place the tokens into a hollow clay ball and seal it. Then, to remember what was inside, they'd stamp the outside with impressions of each token. This envelope system is considered a stepping stone to actual written language. Imagine someone handing you a smooth mud orb and saying, "Trust me, this means I owe you 5 goats." So yeah, receipts kind of predate the alphabet. Wild, you follow Lugal out into the warm night air. The city buzzes with low conversation, torchlight flickers along stone walls, and carts creak over cobblestone. Somewhere nearby, a priest is reciting inventory. 2 cows short. Again, there's something oddly comforting about it all. The hum of record-keeping. The scratch of stylus against clay. The knowledge that, even 5,000 years ago, someone was staying up too late trying to prove they didn't steal a sheep. You stretch your neck, feel the heat of the day still lingering in the bricks, and realize, civilization didn't begin with fire or the wheel, it began with someone saying, "Hey, I want that in writing." You wake the next morning with a dry mouth and barley dust in your hair. The temple's stone bench wasn't designed for sleep, but you survived the night, barely. A goat bleats somewhere nearby. Someone yells about missing dates. And you remember why you're here: the barley problem. Mesopotamia runs on barley. Not just for eating, though a nice warm barley stew is a staple, but also for brewing beer, paying workers, and settling debts. You'd think something so vital would be tightly regulated, but no. It's chaos. Every farmer claims their barley's better, every buyer haggles, and everyone conveniently forgets quantities once the sun sets. You trail a merchant through a dusty side street. He's pushing a cart loaded with barley sacks, sweat glistening under the weight of the Mesopotamian sun. The man's got a ledger tablet tucked under one arm and a permanent scowl. Let's call him Darim. Darim is furious. Last week, he delivered 12 measures of barley to a customer. Let's call her Nimbara, and now she claims she only got 10. The receipt, sadly, was not baked. It got smeared in the rain. Now it looks like someone doodled with their elbow. This is the kind of thing that leads to shouting matches in the public square. So today, Darim is back at the temple, demanding a better system. He's not alone. Merchants, farmers, and scribes gather in a sticky corner room under a crumbling ziggurat. Arguing about units of measurement. Is 1 sela of barley really a sela if the container is cracked? Should damp barley count the same as dry? Historians still argue whether early units were standard across cities or wildly inconsistent, and honestly, both answers are funny. Someone proposes a radical idea: double documentation. 1 receipt for the buyer, 1 for the seller, both pressed and baked. And to make sure they match, both parties sign, well, impress, a little personal seal on the clay. Like an ancient signature, but more arts and crafts. Now you're sitting cross-legged next to Darim, who's angrily carving 12 into a tablet with a fresh stylus. You offer to help, but only end up poking your thumb into the soft clay and ruining it. Oops. They hand you a cleaning rag and send you to the corner. You are not scribe material. Here's the thing: this messiness, this obsession with barley, is what pushes Mesopotamia to develop more complex systems of accounting. Receipts become less about who owes what and more about how exactly they owe it. Was it front-loaded? Was it a loan? Did they use interest? Yes, Mesopotamians had interest rates. And yes, they documented them. One curious receipt you come across lists not just the quantity of barley but the exact date. The names of witnesses, and the location of the transaction, under the fig tree by the western wall. You imagine someone trying to argue later, "No, I did that deal under the eastern fig tree." And a priest rolling their eyes so hard they dislodge a clay bead from their necklace. Even more fascinating. Barley wasn't always traded for silver or goods. Sometimes it was traded for labor. 1 tablet, half-cracked but still readable, shows, 1 man for 2 days equals 3 sela barley. In essence, you're reading the world's first paycheck. Kinda underwhelming, huh? Still, you get a sense of just how vital this grain is. It's more than food. It's currency. Status. Security. The backbone of every dusty little receipt pressed into a lump of clay. But here's where it gets quirky. Some scribes, not the good ones, obviously, start embellishing. You find a tablet that lists 13.5 sila, with a tiny doodle of a donkey in the corner. Why the donkey? No one knows. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe the scribe was bored. Maybe it means something deep and mystical. Historians still argue whether such doodles were symbolic or just ancient graffiti. The deeper you go, the more obsessed you become with these dry, flaky records. You notice patterns. Some scribes are neater. Some use shorthand. Some draw borders around important info. You find one with a little thumbprint at the bottom, probably the customer's seal. It's humanizing, in a way. These weren't faceless bureaucrats, they were people, trying their best to not get yelled at over a missing sack of grain. You glance up at the temple wall. The sun has shifted. Shadows stretch like ink spills over the baked bricks. Darim, now slightly less sweaty, thanks the head scribe and ties his double-baked receipts into a reed bundle. He looks almost hopeful. You ask if this system will last. He shrugs, he says, until someone eats the tablet or uses it as a coaster again. Sure. You laugh, then pause. Because yeah, that happens. Archaeologists have found receipts with dog bite marks, charred corners, even crude doodles layered over the original text. You're not supposed to draw on receipts, but when has that ever stopped anyone? One last discovery before you leave. In the corner of the archive sits a bowl of broken tablets. Mistakes. Rejected drafts. You pick one up and trace the faint lines. Someone had written 15 measures of barley, then scratched it out and rewritten 10. Was it a correction or a scam? You'll never know. That's the joy of boring history. It hides weird little mysteries in the margins. The barley problem isn't completely solved today. But the temple has rules now. Proof. Signatures. A sense of order. And that's enough to let Darim sleep at night. Maybe you too. You walk away from the temple as the sun starts to dip again, a soft orange light washing over Uruk. Behind you, someone is already complaining about lentils. You're back in the scribe quarters again. It smells like hot clay, faintly singed hair, and something you think might be goat milk. Or glue. Either way, you take a deep breath, because tonight you're going to master the Mesopotamian stylus. Spoiler, you won't. You sit at a low table beside a young apprentice named Enlil Shuma, who grins as he hands you a fresh, palm-sized slab of wet clay. He holds up a long, narrow reed stylus and demonstrates, press at an angle for a wedge, straight on for a dot. Easy, right? No. Not at all. Your first try ends in a squashed mess that looks like a bird slipped in pudding. Enlil Shuma politely calls it expressive. You both laugh. The stylus, this simple, sharpened reed, is the cornerstone of early writing. It's how scribes transform squishy lumps of earth into ledgers, contracts, and receipts. At first, the symbols are pictographic. A drawing of a fish means a fish. A circle with a dot is the sun. But over time, things get abstract. More efficient. Faster to press. A fish becomes a wedge with a squiggle, and the sun is just a stylized disk. That's the start of cuneiform, the world's first real writing system. You try again. This time, your barley symbol ends up looking like a depressed taco. Enlil Shuma shrugs. Close enough for a tax record, he says. In fact, most receipts around this time weren't trying to win art contests. They were practical. Time-saving. Designed to be read quickly by busy scribes and cranky temple accountants. If you could glance at a tablet and immediately understand, this guy still owes a goat and half a day of labor, then the symbol was working. Still, not everyone could read these markings. Literacy was rare. Mostly confined to scribes and temple elites. So seals, those carved cylinder stamps, were crucial. You roll one across a tablet and watch as it leaves behind a detailed impression of a lion chasing a goat. That's someone's signature. A way to prove identity without having to read a single wedge. Some seals are simple, just names or symbols. Others are elaborate, full battle scenes, prayers, even what might be the first corporate logos. One tablet has a seal featuring two identical twins holding jars of oil. Historians still argue whether this was a family crest, a merchant brand, or just a really specific inside joke. There's something hypnotic about it. The quiet rhythm of pressing stylus to clay. Tap. Slide. Tap. Rotate. Like ancient typing. You start to zone out, maybe it's the heat, maybe it's the repetition, but suddenly you're imagining a bored scribe inventing emojis. A little wedge for happy, another for bad fish smell. Don't laugh. They had symbols for complaints and insults, too. In Lil Shuma shows you a receipt from a few years ago. The script is sharper, more confident. The clay has darkened with age. It records a transaction between a brewer and a temple official, 20 jars of beer delivered, 5 returned, balance settled. The brewer's seal. A man holding a cup with foam bubbles. That's branding. You run your fingers over the hardened clay. It's oddly satisfying, like touching a fossilized thought. You realize this receipt has outlived everyone it mentions. The beer's long gone, but the record remains. That's what's so strangely beautiful about receipts. They're little time machines. Of course, not every receipt was immortalized. Many were reused. Clay could be recycled before it dried. Mistakes. Just smush and start over. Important documents got baked in ovens or left out in the sun, turning them rock hard. Those are the ones archaeologists find centuries later, often by accident. Imagine tripping over 4,000 years of unpaid barley debt while looking for pottery shards. As you start to get the hang of things, your latest tablet isn't entirely embarrassing. And Lil Shuma points out something odd. One tablet has a line of cuneiform that seems sarcastic. A merchant's name is followed by a phrase that translates loosely as always late. Is that an editorial comment? Passive-aggressive accounting? Scholars debate this. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe the scribe was just tired. Maybe that merchant really was always late. You ask in Lil Shuma how long it takes to become a real scribe. He groans. 10 years if you're lucky. 15 if you make mistakes. He gestures to a clay tablet that's clearly been snapped in half and clumsily glued. That one took me 2 weeks. Scribe school is no joke. It's long. Tedious. Full of repetition. But it's also power. In a society where writing equals knowledge, being able to create receipts, contracts, and records means you control the flow of information. You see things others don't. You remember what others forget, and when you mess up, well, there's a whole pit outside for broken clay. A literal archive of human error. Just as the sun begins to fade behind the ziggurat, a shout comes from the street. A young boy runs in holding a crushed receipt. He sat on it. There's panic. A cow trade needs to be verified, and the tablet is now just sad dust. You and Lil Shuma watch as the older scribes groan, roll up their sleeves, and start recreating it from memory. You suddenly understand the value of good documentation. It's not just about writing, it's about preserving trust. In a world without digital backups or cloud storage, a baked clay tablet is the difference between fairness and chaos. As night falls and the scribes light small oil lamps, you quietly press your own clumsy barley symbol one last time. You scratch your name beside it, well, sort of, and lay the tablet on the drying shelf, a receipt no one will ever need. But still, yours. You're starting to feel like one of the regulars now. The scribes don't even look up when you wander in anymore, they just grunt and keep stabbing clay like accountants on a deadline. But today, you don't stay in the scribe quarters. Today, you follow a farmer and a cow through the bustling streets of a Mesopotamian town, where writing isn't just about barley anymore, it's about contracts. And cows. And consequences. The cow in question is a big, slow-moving creature with flies in its eyelashes and a bell that jingles with each begrudging step. The farmer, let's call him Dumuzi, is clearly nervous. He's leading the cow to the temple to settle a dispute, and it's not looking good for him. Apparently, 2 weeks ago, Dumuzi agreed to sell this cow to a merchant for 7 shekels of silver. The cow was supposed to be delivered in good health. But somewhere between the handshake and the delivery, the cow got sick. Now the merchant claims he was scammed. Dumuzi claims it was fine when it left. The cow, of course, says nothing. You step carefully around puddles as you follow them to the temple court. It's hot. Flies buzz. A bored priest-jurist sits at a shaded bench with a clay tablet in hand. He reads out the original agreement. Yes, it was written down, presses a thumb to his forehead, and sighs, "Where's the cow's receipt?" He asks. That's when Dumuzi produces it, a small baked tablet. Hard as a rock, with cuneiform lines and a seal impression. It details the agreement: 1 cow, healthy, delivered within 3 days. The merchant nods. That part is accurate. Here's where it gets sticky. See, the cow was delivered on time. But now it limps. There's some debate about whether that counts as a breach of contract. Did it limp before? Did someone kick it? Did the merchant feed it rotten onions? Historians still argue whether these early receipts functioned purely as records or if they were legal contracts with binding authority. Today, they certainly act like one. The priest sighs again, writes down some notes on a fresh tablet, and calls a second witness, the neighbor who saw the cow on day 2. This man, chewing on something that may or may not be a twig, testifies that the cow looked kinda sad but was walking fine. So helpful. Eventually, the priest rules that the transaction will stand, but the merchant will receive a partial refund, 2 shekels back. It's not perfect justice, but at least it's on the record. Both parties press their seals into the new receipt. The cow is led away, still limping. Dumuzi mutters under his breath and trudges back to his farm. It's a surprisingly modern moment. Dispute resolution via receipts. Contracts clarified not by memory, but by ink, well, clay, and symbols. This is how writing evolves, from simple grain records to complex legal tools, and it keeps evolving. Later that day, you browse the temple archive and discover a particularly fascinating tablet. It contains the earliest known example of a loan agreement. A man borrows 10 measures of barley and agrees to pay it back, with interest, after the harvest. The tablet specifies the due date, the interest rate, 33%, ouch, and the witness. The man's seal is pressed below a line that roughly translates as, "May the gods curse me if I lie." Mesopotamian credit scores, powered by fear of divine smiting. You also find a peculiar tablet that mentions 1 goat and half a fish. Delivered in trust. Half a fish? Why? Was it a snack? A joke? A metaphor? No one really knows. Scholars still debate whether phrases like this were meant literally or had symbolic meaning. The more you explore, the more contracts you uncover. Leases, loans, purchases, marriages, divorces. One particularly dramatic receipt outlines the transfer of land between 2 brothers after their father's death, including a clause that says, "Neither shall curse the other before the gods." Which, let's be honest, sounds like it was added for very personal reasons. And then, tucked in the corner of the archive, you stumble across something odd. A clay tablet no bigger than your palm. It records the delivery of a single onion. Yes, an onion. The quantity is 1, the condition is ripe, and the delivery location is near the east gate. It even includes a seal. You hold it like treasure. 1 onion. That's it. Some poor scribe took time to record this. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe it was an obligation. Maybe onions were serious business, but it speaks to the reach of receipts. Nothing was too small, too weird, or too unimportant to document. This system wasn't static either. Over time, the symbols shifted. Early cuneiform was pictographic and clumsy. Later versions became more abstract and efficient. A stylus could press faster, straighter. Writing became standardized, at least as much as possible in a world without spellcheck, but it wasn't just writing that changed. The function of receipts deepened. They stopped being mere records and started being tools of negotiation, evidence in disputes, shields against scams. A merchant could walk into a temple and say, "Here is my receipt. I fulfilled my part." And the scribes? They'd back him up. If the tablet held, it's hard not to feel impressed by the sheer administrative willpower it took to run a civilization like this. No apps. No computers. Just damp clay, long hours, and the occasional goat wandering into the wrong office. As the sky darkens and the cow's bell echoes faintly down the street, you realize something important. Writing didn't begin with grand stories. It began with arguments about livestock. With debt. With someone losing a fish, and with the very first time someone said, "I need proof." The temple looms behind you as you make your way down a narrow stone path, flanked by cracked mud walls and low reed fences. It's cooler today, relatively, and the smell of wet clay hangs in the air like a sleepy fog. You're headed somewhere different now. Not to a farm or a scribe's desk, but to the center of financial power in Mesopotamia, the temple treasury, because in this ancient world, temples aren't just places to pray. They're the first banks. You step through a wide arch and into a large open courtyard. The floor is lined with stamped bricks, some bearing names of kings and priests, others smoothed down from years of sandals scuffing past. You see rows of jars stacked along the walls, tall ones. Wide ones, sealed with sticky resin and covered in scribbled receipts. A priest with deeply tanned skin and a tired expression greets you. Let's call her Ninshabar. She oversees the temple's stores and has the posture of someone who's been dealing with barley shortages for 20 years. She waves you over to a platform where workers are unloading carts, jars of oil, bundles of wool, baskets of dates, and yes, more barley. Ninshabar doesn't rely on guesswork. She points to a wooden box filled with dried clay tablets. Deposits, she mutters. Offerings. Loans. Rentals. Pick a category. You peek inside. Every tablet is marked, every jar has a number, and every transaction is logged. It's not spiritual, at least, not here. It's logistical. Temples like this aren't just religious centers. They're economic engines. People bring offerings, grain, animals, even labor, and the temple redistributes these goods as loans or payments. In many Mesopotamian cities, temples are the biggest landowners, employers, and moneylenders. And the receipts they generate? Well, they're everywhere. You're handed a tablet to examine. It records a deposit of 2 jars of sesame oil by a farmer named Zotzi, to be held for 6 months. There's even a clause, if oil spoils, temple not liable. Very convenient. Another record logs the loan of 5 workers to a noble's estate. Their names are listed, along with how many days of labor they owe and how many measures of barley they'll receive in return. It's not glamorous, but it's precise. There's even a backup copy in case of breakage, and then there's the rental section. Yes, people rent things from the temple. Plows, oxen, wagons. One receipt shows, 1 ox, 1 cart, rented for 3 days to Hammurabi, 2 shekels. The ox's condition is described as sturdy. Temperamental. That's detail. Of course, things aren't always so tidy. Ninshabar tells you about a scandal from last year. Someone tried to return an ox with a cracked horn and demanded a full refund. The receipt clearly stated horn intact, so the temple denied it. The man allegedly tried to bribe a junior scribe, who instead reported him. The receipt saved the temple from losing money, and the man from trying that again. You ask what happens to all these old receipts. Ninshubber leads you to a rear storeroom. The walls are lined with shelves, each holding trays of dried tablets, organized by year and type. Some are crumbling, others still sharp. They're not just old records, they're the city's memory. And memory, here, is currency. One section of the archive catches your eye. The loans and disputes pile. Here's where things get juicy. You pick up a tablet with bold, angry strokes. It's a claim filed by a merchant who says he was shorted on a wool shipment. His receipt shows the promised amount, but the temple's counter-receipt lists a different figure. You can almost hear the shouting. Eventually, a ruling was made. Witnesses confirmed the merchant miscounted. The case was dismissed. He still had to make his offering to the gods, though. Can't argue with divine bureaucracy, and the gods. Oh, they're always in the fine print. Many receipts invoke them. By Shamash, the sun god, this loan is true. Or if this tablet is false, may Enlil strike down the liar. Early banking, sponsored by divine wrath. Your overdraft fee today might be $35. But in UR, it was a thunderbolt to the head. Historians still argue whether temples intentionally merged economics and religion to control the populace, or if it was just a natural extension of spiritual authority. Either way, the system worked. For a while, you follow Ninshubber back out into the sunlight. A caravan of donkeys arrives, their packs swaying with every step. A new delivery. New records to file. More tablets to stamp. It never stops. One donkey drops something, a small leather pouch filled with silver rings, Mesopotamia's proto-currency. You pick one up. It's smooth, worn thin. And yes, there's a receipt for it. For rings deposited, value equal to 10 measures barley. Even silver needs documentation. Back in the courtyard, you see a young scribe struggling with a seal that won't leave a clear impression. Ninshubber helps him steady it. Press. Hold. Done. Always bake the important ones, she mutters. If it's not baked, it didn't happen. Before you leave, she offers you a gift, a tablet from the discard pile. It's cracked, the writing smudged. You squint and decipher, 2 goats delivered, 1 returned. Buyer dissatisfied. No refund. Classic. As you walk back through the market square, the role of temples becomes clearer. They're not just spiritual centers, they're the beating hearts of early capitalism. They manage trust. They store wealth. And they keep receipts. Lots and lots of receipts. You're up early the next morning, wiping barley husks from your robe and following the sound of heated argument echoing from a nearby courtyard. Something's going down, a transaction gone sideways, judging by the tone. You yawn, stretch, and shuffle toward the commotion, where 3 men and a teenage scribe are squaring off beside a strange object. It looks like a baseball, if baseballs were made of lumpy brown clay and sealed shut like a vault. Welcome to the wonderful, weird world of ancient Mesopotamian bully, the ancestors of receipts, and possibly the reason you're about to get deeply confused before breakfast. You edge in closer, trying to understand the drama. The teenager, stylus in hand, is waving a hardened clay sphere over his head. One of the men, red-faced and wheezing, is shouting something about barley. The other man crosses his arms, shaking his head with the kind of smug confidence that only someone with a clay envelope in his favor can pull off. The teenager finally slams the object onto the stone floor. It cracks. Bits of hardened earth scatter. Inside, tiny tokens, each one shaped like a different object. One resembles a grain sack, another a goat. You peer over his shoulder as he lines them up like game pieces. There's a gasp. The tokens prove it, the transaction was recorded correctly, and the shouty man owes 5 sacks of barley, not 4. He curses. The teenager tries to look serious and mature but can't quite suppress a triumphant grin. Somewhere in the heavens, an ancient accountant smiles. These strange clay spheres, called bully, are one of the earliest known systems of transaction verification. Before writing matured, these token-filled envelopes were how deals were sealed, literally. Each token represented a unit of goods. Once the agreement was made, they were placed inside a hollow clay ball, sealed up, and sometimes even stamped with both parties' personal seals. The best part? To check the deal, you had to smash it open. No peeking. No editing. Just clay, trust, and the occasional dramatic reveal. Eventually, as writing developed, people started pressing impressions of the tokens onto the outside of the bully before sealing them, sort of like previewing your order on the packaging. Then came the genius move. Instead of using tokens inside, they started just writing the whole thing down directly onto clay tablets. Voila, receipts. You sit with the teenager, his name is Ibby, as he shows you his work. He's clearly proud of his smashed bulla. It held for 8 months, he says, tapping the token gently. We buried it in sand to keep it dry. He points to a nearby wall where fragments of other bullies sit in a small pile. That's the archive. Broken ones, mostly. The transition from tokens to tablets didn't happen overnight. For a while, both systems existed side by side. The older folks trusted the physicality of tokens. There's something satisfying about holding your 5 sheep in miniature. But the younger scribes loved the flexibility of writing. You could be more specific, add clauses, dates, even sarcasm. Who doesn't want a receipt that calls your neighbor a cheapskate and a goat thief? Historians still argue whether this token system was universal across city-states or if each temple had its own version of token language. Some clay balls contain dozens of unique shapes. One archaeologist claimed he found a token shaped like a fish wearing a hat. That may have been an interpretive error, or someone had a sense of humor. Ibby hands you a fresh bulla, unsealed. Want to try? He says. You do. You place 3 pebble-like barley tokens and 1 goat token inside. Then, he helps you roll the clay shut, smoothing it into a ball. You press your stylus into the soft surface, marking you in crooked cuneiform. Ibby grins. Looks like slipper, but okay. He sets the ball aside to dry. That'll last a year, he says, proudly. Unless someone sits on it. You ask him why people still bother with these when clay tablets exist. He shrugs. Old men don't trust writing. They want something they can hold. Fair enough. Trust is the root of all this, whether through tokens or text, the point is the same. You need proof. And you need it to outlast arguments, memory loss, and the occasional camel stampede. Later that day, you visit a nearby storage room and see an astonishing sight, a collection of intact bully, lined up like dusty trophies. One is enormous, bigger than your fist, with intricate seal patterns and what looks like a prayer scratched along the top. The note reads, 20 goats, for safekeeping, if the gods allow. Even back then, people were hedging their bets. You pick it up, feel its weight. It's heavier than expected, probably packed with tiny animal-shaped tokens. You wonder how many hands have held it. How many disagreements it avoided. How many days it sat, waiting to be believed. One curious thing about bully, many were never opened. The transaction happened, the trust held, and the receipt was stored, just in case. Like that mystery drawer in your house filled with receipts for things you'll never return. Only here, it's a hardened clay sphere from 3100 BCE. Much cooler, you set the bulla down gently. You're starting to see receipts not just as records, but as artifacts of fear, faith, and the funny little dance humans do when we don't trust each other but still want to trade goats. As the sun dips low and shadows stretch long across the floor, Ibby tosses you a final thought. You can lie with words, he says, but not with a goat token. He might have a point. You're getting used to the rhythm of Mesopotamian mornings now. A rooster you never see crows at a truly hostile hour, someone yells about fish prices in the street, and somewhere, a cow begins mooing with the passion of a small opera singer. But today, instead of the temple or the archive, you find yourself standing next to a herd of agitated oxen and one very, very angry man, his name is Zemu. He's a herder. He's also red-faced, sweaty, and pacing in frantic semicircles. They gave me the wrong ox. He bellows to no one in particular. I ordered strong and brown. This one is weak and spotted. You stare at the animal. It looks fine, honestly. But Zemu is clearly not okay. The merchant who sold him the ox, let's call him Larsa, isn't much calmer. He insists the ox in question is the correct one. He has the receipt to prove it, too. He thrusts it toward Zemu like a legal sword. Here. He shouts. 3 days ago. Paid. Delivered. Brown with white patches. Seal right there. Zemu snatches it, squints at the markings, and scoffs. That looks nothing like my seal. A crowd begins to gather. Nothing draws Mesopotamians like livestock drama and paperwork. Someone fetches a temple scribe. You, of course, are already tagging along like a curious tourist with an ancient drama addiction. Here's the situation. The wrong ox may have been delivered, and Zemu, bless him, didn't bother to check until this morning when the animal refused to pull a cart. Now there's a dispute, and, as always, the receipt is the key. The scribe arrives, breathless and already annoyed. He's clearly been summoned from breakfast. After a few pleasantries that sound more like threats, he takes the clay receipt from Larsa and begins to read aloud. It lists the agreed price, 4 shekels of silver. The animal's description: brown, adult male, horned, mild-tempered. It includes the delivery location, behind the 3rd house after the brewer's hut. And then, the signature, a seal pressed into the clay, depicting a lion pawing a tree. Zemu turns pale. That's his seal. You lean in. This is a twist. The scribe narrows his eyes. You received this animal, he says, 3 days ago. You signed for it. Zemu stammers. Yes, but, I thought he brought the wrong one. Larsa folds his arms with the smugness of a man who's about to win the ancient version of a Yelp review battle. I told you, he mutters, this is the moment it clicks for you. This receipt isn't just about verifying the deal. It's about protecting people from themselves. Memory fails. Disputes grow. And somewhere, between goats and greed, receipts become more than record, they become evidence. That's the real power of writing. Not poetry, not prophecy. Just the ability to say, actually, no, I have proof. Still, not all receipts were created equal. You spend the afternoon with the scribe, his name is Emek, who lets you dig through a stack of damaged receipts to see how quality varies. Some are masterworks, perfect lines, flawless seals, even decorative borders. Others. Well, they look like someone sneezed during the signing. Crooked strokes, smudged seals, half-finished words, sloppy tablets. Emek mutters, flicking one with his stylus. People treat receipts like firewood. Until they need one. He shows you a peculiar case, a receipt for 5 sheep, delivered by a man named Salama. The catch? The receipt is unsigned. There's a space for the seal, but it's blank. Emek raises an eyebrow. No seal, no deal. And there it is, the Mesopotamian equivalent of if it's not signed, it doesn't count. Historians still argue whether these unsigned receipts were drafts, backups, or just errors. Either way, they don't hold water in disputes. Emek, feeling generous, tells you about one of the most notorious incidents in temple history, the case of the swapped goat. A merchant accidentally delivered the wrong goat, one with a lame leg and a bad temper. The buyer was furious, but the receipt, unfortunately, listed only one adult goat, brown. Vague. Too vague. There was no seal from the merchant, only the buyer's. The case dragged on for weeks. In the end, the priest ruled that both were at fault, one for misleading, the other for not checking. The goat, reportedly, bit everyone involved. Since then, Emek says, most merchants have upped their receipt game. More details. More seals. Some even draw little diagrams, primitive goat stick figures. Circles for wheels, arrows for direction. That last one. Left horn curls inward. That's commitment. Of course, receipts weren't foolproof. Some were forged. Some were altered. And every so often, a seal was stolen. One incident involved a farmer who used his brother's seal to borrow 6 sacks of grain, without telling him. When the temple came knocking, the brother nearly passed out. That's when the scribes started verifying seals with additional witness marks. Even today, MX says, fraud exists. But receipts reduce it. They turn shouting matches into quiet, dusty court cases. And more importantly, they teach people to check the ox before it poops in your courtyard, as the sun sets. You find Zemu and Larsa again. They're standing near the marketplace, no longer yelling. The ox is eating quietly. Zemu mutters something that sounds suspiciously like an apology. Larsa sighs. Next time, check the horns. Zemu nods. Next time, bring a better ox. They don't shake hands. But they do walk off in the same direction, and that's enough. You stay behind, watching the street empty, thinking about how one little clay square, pressed by thumb and stylus, just saved 2 men from a grudge that might have lasted a lifetime. It's not flashy. It's not thrilling. But it's civilization. The market is quieter today, which is to say it's only moderately chaotic instead of full-blown livestock opera. You wander through narrow lanes where reed baskets overflow with onions, dates, and suspiciously sticky figs. A child runs past carrying a lopsided clay tablet, yelling something about his uncle's fish debt. You smile. A good receipt never rests. Today, you're not chasing oxen or sitting in archives. Today, you're going deeper, into the numbers themselves. Because behind every Mesopotamian receipt lies a secret weapon, math. You stop at a booth where 2 scribes are hunched over a waxy slate, arguing. One is drawing a grid, the other keeps muttering, it doesn't divide evenly. The topic? Barley allotments. The problem? Math anxiety. Circa 2500 BCE, the Mesopotamians were math nerds. Not in a flashy, I built a pyramid kind of way, but in a deeply practical, bureaucratic sense. They invented a base, 60-number system, sexagesimal, if you want to sound impressive. That's right, they counted in 60s, not 10s, why? Historians still argue whether it came from finger joints, you have 12 per hand, if you count knuckles with your thumb, or because 60 has lots of divisors, which made it easy to split things evenly. Whatever the reason, it's brilliant and also totally frustrating when you just want to know how much barley you owe. You kneel beside the scribes. One is trying to divide 180 sela of barley among 7 workers. He's sweating. It's easier when it's 6, he mumbles. You offer a helpful nod and absolutely no mathematical input because your 21st century brain is not ready to convert fractional units in sexagesimal. Receipts from this time aren't just vague estimates, they're packed with precise quantities, ratios, and even interest calculations. You're handed a tablet that lists 15 sela lent, 5 sela interest due in 1 moon cycle. That's 33% interest. You blink. That's a lot. In fact, that's fairly standard for the time. High, but not predatory by ancient standards. Mesopotamian scribes had tables for these things, multiplication tables, square roots, reciprocal charts. Not just because they liked math, but because receipts demanded it. If you're going to lend barley today and get it back next month plus interest, you'd better calculate that right, or someone will smash a tablet in your face. You spot a scribe pulling out a particularly large tablet. It's filled edge to edge with tiny symbols. A closer look reveals it's a kind of balance sheet: incoming barley, outgoing wool, worker payments, losses due to rats. Yes, really. One column simply reads, lost, 2 jars. Bitten through. You can imagine someone furiously carving that after a rodent buffet. They even track time precisely. Days, moon cycles, even eclipse months. A delivery receipt might read, on the 15th day after the full moon, 3 oxen transferred. Because timing matters. Some goods spoil. Some labor is seasonal. Some debts grow while you're out arguing about goats. You sit with a young apprentice, he's maybe 10, maybe 11. His stylus is longer than his arm. He shows you his practice tablet, filled with math exercises. 1/3 of 60 sila equals 20 sila. 2 times 30 is equal to 60. 60 times 60 is equal to 3,600. You nod approvingly and quietly hope no one asks you to convert anything into base 60 anytime soon. What's fascinating is how receipts push this development. Mesopotamians didn't create abstract math for fun, they invented it because they needed to track who owed what, how much, and by when. Without receipts, who's to say how much grain was lent? With receipts, you need to be accurate, or disputes follow. Of course, accuracy had its quirks. Sometimes scribes rounded off. One receipt you read lists, 13-ish sila of barley. Literally, the symbol means nearly 14. It's the ancient equivalent of give or take. There's something charmingly human about that. Other times, scribes got clever. One tablet shows a debt repaid not in full but as a combination of goods, 5 sila barley, 2 wool bundles, 1 goat underweight. A modern accountant would scream, but it worked. Receipts weren't just about numbers, they were about negotiation. Math met real life in those dry, cracked lines, and every so often, you find a mistake. One tablet in the archive has a crossed-out line. The revised numbers below don't match the totals above. A note is scribbled in the margin, blame apprentice. You imagine the original scribe groaning, grabbing his stylus, and muttering something unrepeatable. By midday, the scribes are wiping sweat from their brows and fanning half-dried tablets. You try to help, but you accidentally smudge a 7 into a 2 and are politely asked to go sit quietly in the corner. Again, before you leave, someone hands you a clay abacus, not exactly the kind you're used to, but a primitive counting board with indentations for tokens. You slide a few pebbles across, pretending to tally up sheep. It's oddly satisfying. And when you place one last stone into the corner pocket, symbolic for done, the scribe next to you nods. Good, he says. Now write the receipt. You grin. Maybe math isn't so bad. Until someone asks for fractions. It's just after dusk when you find yourself following the faint glow of torches toward a structure you've passed a dozen times but never truly noticed. It's low, stone-walled, and smells faintly of hot ink and burnt dust. A familiar scribe, Emek, from the ox dispute, waves you in. Tonight, you're finally visiting the scribe school, and oh, it's exactly as intense as it sounds. Inside, rows of young apprentices sit hunched over tablets, brows furrowed, styluses twitching with the tense energy of students trying not to mess up the Mesopotamian equivalent of a final exam. The air is thick with quiet grunts, the occasional frustrated sigh, and the unmistakable sound of clay being angrily squished and reset. Barley quota receipts, Emek whispers with a smirk. Their favorite. You take a seat at the back, careful not to interrupt the flow of pure bureaucratic concentration. One student, barely old enough to grow a beard, scratches his ear with his stylus, then accidentally leaves a gouge in his tablet. He stares at it for a moment, then lets out a quiet, despairing groan. A moment later, he's smushed the whole thing into a lump and started over. Welcome to scribe training, where mistakes have the texture of wet clay and perfection takes years. Emek leans closer and explains that becoming a professional scribe takes at least a decade of training. 10 years of numbers, wedge shapes, grammar drills, and wrist cramps. But for those who make it, the rewards are immense. Scribes are the memory of society. The record keepers. The proof in every argument. You're handed a practice tablet. It's smooth, square, and slightly warm. The assignment? A basic tax receipt for temple labor. Emek gently sets down a reference tablet beside yours. Copy this, he says. The original reads, received from Enkisera, 30 sila barley for temple duty. 5 days labor in kind. Witnessed by Demuzi, third priest. You eye the symbols, then glance at your own tablet. You hesitate. You try. You absolutely fail. Your first line says something that might translate as received from Enki's sandals, and the rest isn't much better. MX snorts. Passable for someone who doesn't know which end of the stylus is which. You smile. The truth is, scribes weren't just writers, they were engineers of information. And scribe school was their crucible. The students don't just learn writing. They memorize math tables, legal terms, religious phrases, and inventory formulas. You pass one boy muttering, 5 goats, 2 jars of oil, 1 shekel refund. Like a sacred chant. Another girl is practicing seal identification. She's squinting at a slab with 15 different impressions, trying to name their owners. That's the thing, Mesopotamian scribes weren't anonymous. They had styles, quirks, even reputations. Some favored neat, angular writing. Others pressed deep, dramatic wedges. You find a pile of rejected tablets, and one of them has a little face carved into the corner. A joke? A calling card? Maybe just a moment of rebellion. Historians still debate whether scribes had creative freedom or if everything was dictated by the temple. But the presence of variations, even scribal doodles, suggests a little personality slipped through. One of the more advanced students, a girl named Shamhat, is working on a particularly tricky task, a contract involving rent payments in 3 commodities, all with changing values. She shows you her draft. It includes a note in the corner, subject to temple rate adjustment. You nod, deeply impressed. She's 17, MX shows you a special section of the room, a clay tablet library. Shelves hold hundreds of tablets sorted by type, grain receipts, land deeds, livestock tallies, loan contracts. Many are copies. Apprentice scribes often spent years copying old tablets to train their hands and eyes. You pick up one with slightly shaky lines. The title etched at the top. Receipt of 8 ducks, paid in advance. It's a copy, the original long since buried or broken. But the practice version still holds the story. 8 ducks, someone's dinner, someone else's responsibility. Even after years of training, scribes faced regular assessments. Fail too many. You're out. Survive long enough. You might land a temple position. Or maybe even a private gig. Some merchants and nobles hired personal scribes to manage their affairs. They were the ancient equivalent of personal accountants, email managers, and notaries all rolled into one. Before you go, Emek pulls out one last item, a fragment of an apprentice's personal journal. Not an official record, but a rare glimpse of emotion. The lines are faint, but the message is clear. Today, I broke my 3rd tablet. Master laughed. I did not. You laugh gently. Some things never change. As the torches burn lower and the students begin stacking their practice tablets to dry, Emek turns to you. The first receipt you write is always bad, he says. The 10th is better. The 100th is truth. You step back out into the evening, the scent of warm clay still on your fingers, and realize that somewhere inside that stone-walled room, the history of every trade, every dispute, every duck delivery, is being prepared for eternity, one shaky stylus stroke at a time. As the days stretch on, you begin to notice a pattern emerging in the receipts. They're not just about goods or money, they're about people. About relationships. About trust, fear, and the very messy business of human interaction. Today, you find yourself in a quiet corner of the city, near the homes of the merchant class. The streets here are less crowded, the air carries a faint scent of baked bread and fresh wool. You meet a woman named Inanna, no relation to the goddess, though her parents might have liked the idea, who runs a small textile shop. Inanna is no stranger to receipts. Her shop survives on contracts, promises, and, crucially, the written proof of every sale and loan. She pulls out a small collection of tablets from beneath her counter, wool deliveries, dye payments, rented loom receipts. Each one has a story, one tablet catches your eye, a loan agreement between Inanna and a wealthy trader. She borrowed 5 bundles of dyed wool, agreeing to repay 10 in return after the harvest. It's a steep interest rate, but the trader's seal is clear, and the terms are explicit. Inanna explains how difficult it was to negotiate. They say wool's a luxury, but to me it's survival. This receipt saved me when my shipment got delayed. She pauses. But it's also a burden. Miss one payment, and the debts grow. You notice a smaller tablet, worn smooth. It's a receipt for a different kind of debt, one of favors. A neighbor lent Inanna some grain when her family was ill, and the receipt carefully notes, to be repaid with labor or goods within 6 months. You smile. Even back then, IOUs had fine print. There's also a receipt recording a cancelled marriage contract. Yes, marriage could be a contractual business too, complete with deposits, bride prices, and penalties for backing out. Historians still argue whether these receipts were legally binding or social formalities. Inanna leans in, whispering, "Trust me, they were binding enough to cause fights." She pulls out a receipt that's different from the rest, a personal note scribbled by a scribe, not sealed but tucked carefully inside a bundle of wool. It's an apology from a merchant who delivered less than promised, along with a promise to make it right. It's informal but powerful. A reminder that behind every transaction, there's a person. Inanna's stories give you a new appreciation for receipts, not just as cold records but as living documents, full of emotion, risk, and human drama. Later, you visit a temple official who explains the darker side of receipts, debt slavery. When debts piled too high, borrowers might have to work off their loans, sometimes for years. Receipts documented these agreements. And sometimes even the transfer of people as collateral. It's grim, but essential history. The official pulls out a receipt detailing a man's contract to work 3 years in exchange for repayment of his family's debt. There's a clause, if escape occurs, gods will punish. You swallow hard. Even in a world of clay and ink, power dynamics play out painfully. Despite that, receipts provided a measure of protection. Without them, there was no proof of agreements, no way to prevent kidnappings or false claims. The tablets became shields for the vulnerable, even if imperfect ones. You reflect on the blend of mercy and mercilessness, trust and suspicion encoded into these tablets. Inanna's shop. The temple's archives, the market disputes, they all revolve around the same core, humans trying to balance fairness, survival, and hope, and in that, the ancient receipt becomes not just a piece of clay but a window into the heart of civilization itself. The sun feels lower, the air cooler as you wander toward the outskirts of the city, where sprawling fields stretch under a hazy sky. You're drawn to the large granaries, thick with the scent of stored grain, the constant hum of ants, and the occasional squawk of a startled bird. This is the city's pantry, the reservoir of wealth, and once again, receipts are at the center. Inside, temple officials move like shadows between towering stacks of barley and emmer wheat. They carry tablets, sealed envelopes, and bundles of reed pens. You meet one such official, Utunapishtim, who's responsible for inventory and distribution. He's a man who understands that counting barley isn't just about numbers but about trust, responsibility, and, frankly, a little bit of magic. Utunapishtim shows you a collection of receipts related to grain storage. Some record deposits, 20 measures of emmer wheat, delivered by farmer Asher, sealed with lion's paw. Others are withdrawals for temple use, and some note spoilage or theft, because yes, even back then, barley thieves were a thing. One receipt catches your eye, it's from a farmer complaining about receiving less grain than promised. The note is carefully written, received 15 sila, promised 20, discrepancy acknowledged. This isn't just a simple error, it's a formal complaint, baked into clay for all time. Utunapishtim tells you that disputes like this were common. Sometimes the problem was storage loss, other times dishonest officials. Receipts became crucial for accountability. You ask about the system's limits. How did they prevent fraud, or mistakes? The official shrugs. We bake tablets to preserve them, keep copies in archives, and rely on seals. But no system is perfect. Historians still debate whether the granary receipts were part of an early form of taxation or more voluntary temple offerings. Utunapishtim smiles and says, "Ask the gods." He shows you a receipt for barley offered to Enlil, god of wind and storms. It's marked with multiple seals and a prayer for a good harvest. The spiritual and economic worlds were intertwined. You watch as workers load grain onto carts for delivery to craftsmen, priests, and city workers. Each shipment accompanied by a receipt, a contract, a promise. The granaries are more than storage, they're hubs of power. Control the grain, and you control the city. You spot a tablet recording a loan of barley to a distant village, secured by a promise of future harvest. It's a receipt, a contract, and a lifeline. As you leave, you glance back at the towering stacks. Each grain, each receipt, each seal tells a story of trust and risk, of survival in a harsh world. You carry that feeling with you, understanding that in Mesopotamia, the humble receipt wasn't just a record, it was a lifeline, a symbol of order in chaos. Even as the grain quietly shifts in the granaries, you find yourself drawn back to the bustling streets where trade pulses like a restless heartbeat. The city's merchants don't just trade barley and wool, they trade in ideas, power, and influence. And receipts? They're the language that keeps it all from spinning into chaos. You stop by a bustling market stall run by a man named Nabu, a merchant specializing in rare goods, lapis lazuli beads, exotic spices, and jars of perfume that smell faintly of cedar and mystery. Nabu grins when you mention receipts. Without them, he says, I might as well be shouting into the wind. He pulls out a collection of his own receipts, some tiny, some large, all meticulously stamped and sealed. One receipt documents a trade, 10 lapis beads exchanged for 2 jars of perfume, witnessed by trader Enlil Bani. Another lists a loan of silver, with interest and repayment dates carefully etched. Nabu tells you stories about how receipts allowed him to build trust with traders far beyond the city walls. Without written proof, deals fell apart, accusations flew, and alliances shattered. But with a receipt, he could cross deserts, mountains, and rivers knowing someone would honor the agreement. He laughs when you ask if any receipts ever included funny notes or jokes. Not many, he says, but once a scribe wrote, "May your camels be swift. And your debts forgiven." I kept that one. You ask about fraudulent receipts, were they common? Nabu nods solemnly. Yes. Some forged seals, others altered numbers. But catching fraud was easier with tablets. People were scared of temple justice. He points to a tablet with a cracked seal, the forgery obvious to trained eyes. Nabu also shows you an unusual receipt, a contract for marriage goods. Bride price, dowry, and promises, he explains. Even love has paperwork here. You smile. Ancient matchmaking had an office component. Historians still debate whether such personal contracts were widespread or limited to elites. Either way, the presence of receipts in marriage shows how deeply paperwork pervaded daily life. Before you leave, Nabu shares a proverb, the best receipt is the one you never need. Wise words. As you walk away, you realize that receipts are more than ink and clay, they're trust made tangible, contracts turned permanent, and stories etched for generations. They're the quiet heroes behind every deal, every promise, every ancient handshake. The day wanes, and you find yourself wandering toward the quieter side of the city, where scribes gather for discussions that don't always involve receipts but often do. Here, in the shadowed courtyards, you overhear debates that spark your curiosity. Historians still argue whether the Mesopotamian receipt system was primarily a tool of economic control or a genuine attempt at fair trade. You meet a seasoned scribe named Ishkur, who has spent decades recording transactions and negotiating disputes. His voice carries the weariness of someone who's seen the same arguments over and over, about fairness, power, and the human tendency to cheat. We write to remember, Ishkur says, but sometimes what is remembered serves the powerful. He shares tales of how temple officials sometimes manipulated receipts to justify higher taxes or seize land. A receipt can be a weapon, as much as it is a shield, he adds. You listen as Ishkur recounts a famous case involving land deeds. A farmer claimed his neighbor's tablet was forged, a blatant attempt to steal fertile ground. The dispute dragged on, with sealed tablets being compared and witnesses interrogated. In the end, the temple council ruled in favor of the farmer, but only after years of conflict. These episodes remind you that receipts, while practical, are never neutral. They reflect the politics of their time. Still, Ishkur insists that the receipt system was revolutionary. A step toward accountability and order. Without them, chaos would reign. You ask about the scribe's role in these power dynamics. Ishkur smiles wryly. We are the keepers of memory and truth. But also, we are fallible humans. Historians debate whether scribes were impartial recorders or active players in economic schemes. Evidence shows both. Some scribes altered receipts to favor patrons, others resigned in protest. You watch as Ishkur stamps a tablet with his seal, the weight of history pressing down with every wedge-shaped mark. It's a reminder that every receipt is part fact, part story, part power play. As twilight deepens, you reflect on the fragile dance between truth and power, trust and suspicion, a dance etched into clay thousands of years ago, yet still echoing today. The city's pulse slows as evening settles in, but you're drawn to one last place, the archives. Rows upon rows of tablets, sealed envelopes, and fragments sit stacked under flickering oil lamps, whispering stories you can almost hear. You meet Neen Sun, an elderly archivist whose hands tremble slightly as she opens a clay box to reveal a fragile receipt. These are the memories of our people, she says softly. Every transaction, every promise, preserved. She shows you tablets that are thousands of years old, some cracked, others pristine. Each carries a weight beyond its clay form, a testament to trust, conflict, survival. Neen Sun shares a story about a particular tablet, a receipt for a shipment of timber, delivered to a temple undergoing restoration. The tablet includes a prayer for the workers' safety and a plea to the gods to protect the city's walls. It strikes you how these receipts blend the practical and the spiritual, the mundane and the sacred. You wonder about the fate of these tablets. How many were lost? How many shattered in fires, floods, or the hands of invaders? Yet, some survived millennia, whispering secrets of ancient lives. Historians debate the true extent of receipt use. Were they common among all classes or mostly temple and merchant affairs? The truth probably lies somewhere in between. As Neen Sun carefully reseals the box, she reminds you that these tablets were more than proof, they were symbols of civilization itself. Outside, the night sky is a tapestry of stars, indifferent yet eternal. You feel the weight of time and the quiet resilience of clay tablets, knowing that in these fragile records, the first whispers of accounting, trust, and human connection endure. The city is quiet now, the day's chaos softened into gentle murmurs and distant owl calls. You find yourself wandering back through familiar streets, the shadows stretching long and blending with the past. Every corner, every dusty tablet you've touched, carries a story, stories woven together by the simple act of recording a transaction. You think about how a receipt isn't just a note on clay. It's a contract, a promise, a fragile bridge between trust and doubt. Whether it's a smashed bulla full of tokens, a carefully sealed tablet, or a hastily scribbled IOU, these records kept society ticking. You recall the ox dispute, the granary tallies, the scribe's dogged perseverance. You remember Inanna's wool shop, Nabu's exotic trade, Ishkur's weary wisdom, and Ninsun's gentle stewardship of memory. Each person, each receipt, a thread in a vast tapestry of human connection. Historians still argue whether these receipts were revolutionary tools of commerce or subtle instruments of control. Maybe both. Because history rarely deals in simple answers. As you walk, the cool night air carries the faint scent of baked bread and reed smoke. Somewhere, a child laughs, and you realize these ancient records shaped the lives of millions, the foundation of trade, trust, and law, and in that, perhaps, lies their true magic. You pause beneath a silver moon, feeling the weight of time softened by the quiet hum of the city. The receipts, fragile though they are, whisper their stories softly, stories of survival, order, and the endlessly human desire to be believed. You take a deep breath and smile, knowing that your journey through ancient Mesopotamia's receipts is ending, but their legacy is forever. now, to gently wind down, the clay tablets rest now, quiet and still. Their edges softened by time, their stories fading into the gentle hum of the night. You feel your own breath slow, the weight of the day slipping away like grains through open fingers. Imagine the warmth of the sun on ancient bricks, the soft scrape of stylus on clay, the whispered prayers that accompanied each seal. Let these images lull you deeper into calmness. The world of receipts, complex, human, enduring, is a reminder that even the smallest marks can carry great meaning. So as you drift toward rest, let the echoes of the past settle softly around you, like the quiet settling of dust in a long-forgotten archive. Good night, traveler. Sweet dreams.